Would you still go closer if every instinct told you not to? You're here for real 4chan stories, the kind told by people after things had already gone too far. The story ahead has that uncomfortable pull, where the wrong choice feels almost unavoidable. Sit back, turn the lights down, and don't forget to subscribe. Alright, let's begin. The overnight job at the old cemetery in Providence pays badly, and nobody wants it, which is exactly why I took it back in 2022 after I lost my warehouse gig. 12 hours a night, 4 nights a week, mostly walking a loop with a flashlight and making sure nobody climbed the fence to drink or do whatever teenagers think you can do inside a graveyard. The place I worked is one of the older ones on the east side. I won't say which. If you know Providence, you can probably guess. There are stones there from the 1800s, some earlier, and a newer section from the 50s on up. Not the touristy one people go to for the famous graves. Ours is quieter, locals only, and most of them are underground. October that year was wet. Not stormy, just this steady drag of gray days where the leaves went black on the paths and everything smelled like moss and cold metal from the fence. I had a routine. Coffee from the Cumberland Farms on Hope Street at 10, gate at 10:30, loop the older section first, then the middle, then the back near the woods. Radio in my pocket, headphones out. My boss was clear about the headphones. He said if something happens and you didn't hear it, that's on you. The first morning I noticed anything was a Tuesday. I was doing the end of shift walk, sun barely up, and I passed a headstone in the old section that had something on top of it. I thought it was trash at first. Wind gets in there and pushes things around. But when I got closer, it wasn't trash. It was a folded handkerchief. White cotton, ironed, with a little blue stitching around the edge, set right in the middle of the stone, not blown there, placed. The grave belonged to a woman who died in 1954. I remember because I stood there for a minute looking at the dates. Born 1889. That's a long life for the time. The handkerchief was clean. It hadn't been out in the rain. I picked it up and put it in my jacket pocket. Figured somebody had left it the day before during visiting hours, and the groundskeepers missed it. Happens. Then I walked another 20 feet, and there was a thimble on the next stone. A brass thimble, old, tarnished on one side, sitting in the little groove where the stone rounds off. That grave was from 1961, a man's name. I stopped, looked around. The paths were empty. Just me and the wet grass, and a couple of crows over by the maintenance shed. I kept walking, and I found 4 more. On a grave from 1978, a pack of playing cards, the kind with the red bicycle back, still wrapped in cellophane, but the cellophane was yellow with age. On one from 1943, a small tin. I opened it. Peppermints. Rock hard, decades old, but still peppermints. On a stone from 1929, a wooden yo-yo, the string wound neat around the middle. And on one from the 70s, a pair of reading glasses with a chain, folded and set very square on the top. 6 graves, 6 objects, all different years, all arranged like someone had come through carefully, one by one, and placed each thing exactly where it belonged. I didn't touch the rest of them. I went back to the office and I sat there with the handkerchief on the desk, and I tried to think what this was, because it wasn't vandalism. I've seen vandalism. Kids knock stones over, they spray paint, they take pieces of the older statuary if they can pry it loose. This was the opposite of that. Whoever did this had walked into the cemetery in the middle of the night, in October, in the rain, and had spent hours placing gifts. I told my boss when he came in at 8. He listened, then he walked out with me and looked at the stones. He picked up the yo-yo and turned it over. Family, he said. Some family's doing a thing. Anniversary maybe? 6 different graves, 6 different families, same night. He didn't have an answer for that. He put the yo-yo back where it was and told me to leave everything and just log it. So I logged it. The next 2 nights, nothing. I walked the same loop and every stone was clean. I started to think maybe he was right, some kind of memorial thing I didn't know about, some little tradition that happened once and was done. Then Friday I came in and there were more. Not the same graves, new ones. A ceramic dog on a stone from 1966. A single knitting needle, just the one, laid across a stone from 1938. A recipe card, handwritten, faded, laid flat and weighted down with a small rock on a grave from 1972. I read the card. It was for a pound cake. The handwriting was shaky and old, the ink brown from time. That's when the back of my neck started to feel wrong. Because these weren't random objects. The knitting needle was on a woman's grave. The recipe was on a woman's grave. The ceramic dog was on a stone, with a little etched terrier on it, which I hadn't noticed before, but somebody had. Whoever was doing this knew these people, or knew something about them. I did the math one night sitting in the office. The earliest grave that had gotten an object was from 1911. The most recent, so far, was 1981. That's a 70-year window. Any person old enough to have known someone buried in 1911 as an adult would have to be well past 100 by now. It wasn't possible. I stopped telling my boss. I don't know why. It felt like something I wanted to see the end of by myself. I bought a trail camera at the Dick's out in Warwick. The kind hunters strap to trees. Motion activated, infrared, records to an SD card. I zip-tied it to a maple by the old section where most of the objects had been showing up. Angled it down the main path. Went home. Slept badly. 2 nights later, I pulled the card. I sat at the desk in the little office with the space heater going, and I put the card in my laptop and I watched. Nothing for hours. Just wind moving the branches. The infrared flaring white on wet leaves. Then, at 2:17 in the morning, someone walked into frame. She was small. Bent forward, wearing what looked like a housecoat with a wool coat pulled over it, and slippers, in October, on grass. She had a canvas tote bag over one arm. She stopped at a stone I hadn't seen her mark yet. She reached into the bag. She took something out, I couldn't tell what, and she set it on top of the stone with both hands, very carefully, the way you'd set down a birthday cake. Then she stood there. She was talking. Her mouth was moving. I couldn't hear anything. The camera didn't do sound. But she talked to the stone for maybe 2 minutes. Nodded once. Then she moved on. She was in frame for over an hour. She went to 9 graves. Some of them she talked to for a long time. One of them, she put her hand flat on the top of the stone and just stood there with her head bent. I watched her the whole time. She was old. Old the way my grandmother was at the end, where every step is a small negotiation with the ground. It must have taken her forever to walk from wherever she came from. She left the way she came, back down the path toward the north gate, which is chained but has a gap in the fence next to it where the ground has settled. I sat there and I watched it twice more. I didn't call the cops. I don't know how to explain that except that she wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't hurting anything. And there was something in the way she stood at those stones that made calling anybody feel like the worst thing I could do. Instead, I took the description down to the Providence Public Library the next afternoon, and I sat with a woman in the local history room, and I told her a version of the story. I said I was trying to identify an older resident I'd seen in the neighborhood, that I was worried she might be getting lost at night. I gave the woman the names on the graves. I asked if there was any way to find a common thread. She was patient with me. She pulled census records and old parish rolls and a couple of neighborhood association directories from the 60s. It took us most of an afternoon. Every single name on those graves had lived within 4 blocks of each other on the east side, between the 20s and the 80s. Neighbors, some of them married into each other. One of them ran a bakery, one taught piano. The man from 1961 with the thimble on his stone had been a tailor. His wife, the librarian told me, had done the finish work with him and had been known in the neighborhood for her hand-stitched handkerchiefs. The librarian gave me a name, a woman still on the tax rolls, at an address 2 streets over from the cemetery, born 1927. I called the number listed. A younger woman answered, a granddaughter. I said I worked at the cemetery and I thought her grandmother might have been visiting there at night. There was a very long pause on the line. She said her grandmother had been walking out of the house for months. They had locks now, alarms on the doors, but she still got out sometimes. The doctors had a word for what was happening in her head. The family didn't know where she went. They'd found her once at a bus stop on Angel Street with no shoes on. Twice at a diner she used to go to in the 60s, which wasn't a diner anymore, just a nail salon, and she'd stood in the parking lot until someone recognized her. She asked me, very quietly, what her grandmother had been doing at the cemetery. I told her. There was another long pause. Then she said her grandmother had lived on that block since she was a girl. Everyone she'd ever known was in that cemetery. Her husband, her sister, the people she'd grown up with. She was the last one. She'd been the last one for a while. The granddaughter said her grandmother didn't remember most of them anymore. Not by name, not in the daytime. I didn't know what to say to that. I told her I hoped she'd be all right. I said if it happened again, I'd walk her home. She thanked me and hung up. I never saw the woman on my camera again. Whether the family got better locks or whether something else changed, I don't know. The objects stopped showing up after that week. I still work there. I still do the loop. Sometimes on the old stones you can see a little ring where something round sat on the granite long enough to leave a mark in the lichen. I notice them more than I used to. Back in 2016, I was working the graveyard slot at a mid-market FM station in Chattanooga, 10 at night to 2 in the morning, Sunday through Thursday. The kind of shift you take because you're 26 and stupid and still think radio is going somewhere. The station sat in a strip of offices on Amnicola Highway, right where the river bends. From the booth window, you could see the parking lot, and past that, the loading bay of a car parts warehouse. That was the whole view. Fluorescent light, a chain-link fence, and after 11 or so, one truck idling out back with its cab light on. I ran the late line show, requests and dedications mostly, older format, soft rock, some country if they asked. My audience was truckers, night nurses, insomniacs, people driving home from second shift. I'd take calls, chat for a minute, put on the song. Simple gig. The first call from him came in around mid-October. I remember because we had a promo running for the World Series, and I was reading the sponsor break when the line lit up. He asked for Angel of the Morning, the Juice Newton version, said, for Carrie, she knows. That was it. No small talk, no laugh, no, how are you tonight? Just the request and the name. I said sure, thanked him, queued it up. Voice was middle-aged, flat, kind of tired, southern but not thick. Could have been anybody's uncle calling from a kitchen table. I forgot about it by the next commercial. Then he called again, maybe 8 days later. Same time, right around 12:40 in the morning. Same song, same line. I clocked it that time. Not enough to be spooked, just enough to notice. Late-night radio has regulars. There was a woman in East Ridge who called every Tuesday asking for Anne Murray. There was a guy who only wanted credence and always said, much obliged, before hanging up. You get to know voices. So when this guy became a pattern, I filed him next to them. Weird, but harmless. He called 4 more times through October and into the first week of November, always between 12:35 and 12:45. Same request, same 6 words at the end. The thing that started to bother me was that he never once responded to me. If I said, sure thing, coming right up, he was already gone, like he'd hung up while I was still talking. Some older callers do that. They get nervous on the air. But this was every time, without fail. And after a while, I began to wonder if he was calling from a landline, where the handset just dropped back into the cradle, without him bothering to hit the switch. The night I looked her up was November 9th. I remember the date because the election had just happened, and the whole station was running political ads back to back, and I was bored out of my mind between breaks. He'd called around 12:38. I put the song on, and then, mostly to kill time, I typed Carrie Chattanooga into the browser on the studio computer. The first result was an obituary in the Times Free Press. Carrie, 34, died November 12, 2012, survived by her mother and a sister in Cleveland, Tennessee. Services at a funeral home in Red Bank. No cause listed. There was a photo, small, black and white in the way newspaper photos always look online. Long hair, dark eyes, a smile like she was trying not to laugh at whoever took it. I read the whole thing twice. Then I closed the tab and went back to the board and pulled the next spot. Look, I know how that sounds now, but at the time it wasn't a big leap for me to assume coincidence. Carrie isn't a rare name. Chattanooga is a real city, not a hamlet, and there were a lot of Carries in it, alive and dead. The song is about mornings after and dumb decisions, not a funeral hymn. If some guy was calling in for his ex, or his sister, or a girl he used to know, it wasn't my business. I let it sit. He called again on November 17th, a Thursday, my last shift of the week. That night, the parking lot was slick with rain, and the truck out back wasn't there for once. The whole building felt bigger without it. I remember the wall clock ticking over to 12:37, and then the request line blinking, and I already knew. I picked up. Late line, "Angel of the morning," he said. "For Carrie, she knows." I hadn't planned to say anything, but my mouth was moving before my head caught up. "Hey, can I ask you something real quick? Who's Carrie? People keep asking me, and I want to get it right on the air." That was a lie. Nobody had asked me anything, but it came out easy. There was a pause, not a short one, long enough that I thought maybe he'd already hung up and I was talking to a dead line. I heard something behind him though, not a TV, not music, something like a fan or a fridge, low and constant. Then he said, "She listens. Every time." He said it the same way he'd said the request. Flat. Not sad, not proud, not warning me. Just a fact he was reading off a card. The line clicked. I sat there with the headphones still on and the ad break running and my hand on the pot for the next song, and I didn't move for maybe 30 seconds. The song came up anyway. Juice Newton started singing about not wanting to see the morning light on somebody's face, and I let it play. I finished the shift, drove home, slept badly, then okay, then badly again. By the time I got back in on Sunday, I'd more or less decided the guy was some sad drunk who'd lost somebody, and this was how he handled it. People do that. It's a real thing. But I also, on Monday afternoon, walked down the hall to the engineering room and asked Doug if he could pull the caller ID and any log we had on the request line for a specific set of times over the last month. Doug was our tech guy, 60-something, one of those men who'd been at the station longer than most of us had been alive. He didn't ask why. He just squinted at me over his glasses and said, "Give me a day." He came back with a printout on Tuesday. Same number every time. Local prefix, registered to a name, Carrie's name, full name matching the obituary. I stared at the sheet for a while, and then I said, "Doug, that's not possible." He shrugged. "That's what's on the account." I asked him to double check with the carrier. He didn't want to, but he called somebody he knew at the phone company anyway, on the pretext of a billing dispute. What he got back that Wednesday was worse. The account was active. Had been active continuously since 2011. Prepaid line. Every month, sometimes twice a month, cash was walked into a kiosk at a convenience store off Rossville Boulevard and applied to the balance. No card, no name at the register. Whoever did it in cash, and the store's cameras were on a 30-day loop. Doug slid the paper across the desk to me and said, "I don't know what you got into, son, but I'd let it go." I said okay. I didn't let it go. Not right away. I drove past that convenience store twice on my way home that week, slow, looking at the lot, looking at the door, looking at nothing in particular. It was the kind of place with a hand-lettered sign for boiled peanuts and a payphone that still worked out front. I never saw anyone I could point to and say, him. I never went inside. He didn't call again. Not on the 24th, when he should have. Not the week after. Not in December. I kept waiting for it the way you wait for a cough to come back after a cold. Every night around 12:35, I'd feel my shoulders come up, and by 12:45, I'd let them down. By January, I'd stopped waiting. I quit the station that spring. Not because of him, or not only. The pay was bad, and my girlfriend at the time wanted to move to Nashville, and I went with her. The whole thing folded into that stretch of my life the way most jobs do. And for a long time, I didn't think about it. Here's what I keep coming back to, though. The phone number. Fine. Numbers get recycled. Accounts get spoofed. There's probably some boring paperwork answer if you dug far enough. And the words he said sound scarier on paper than they did in the booth. The part that stayed with me was the pause. That long piece of quiet on the last call before he answered me, where I could hear the fridge or the fan or whatever it was humming on his end. In my memory, and I know memory does what it wants, there was something else in that hum, not a voice. More like the shape of one. Somebody in the room with him, maybe, breathing at the same pace as the appliance, waiting to hear what he'd say. I've turned that pause over more times than the rest of it put together, because he wasn't stalling, he wasn't deciding, he was asking permission. The file landed on my desk the second week of May, and it looked like every other asset trace I'd taken that year. A creditors committee wanted to know where about $80 million had gone after a mid-sized logistics company folded in Long Beach. Their former CEO, a guy the lawyers only ever called Grant, had walked away clean on paper. No property in his name, no accounts over 5 figures. Even his car was leased through a shell in Nevada. I've been doing this work out of a 2-room office in Pasadena for 11 years. Most cases end the same way. You find a boat in somebody's brother's name, a condo bought by an ex-wife who suddenly has taste for beachfront, maybe a wine collection nobody's actively hiding but nobody wrote down either. The trick is patience and county records. That's the whole job. Grant's file was thicker than usual, but not unusual. What was unusual was how clean he'd left the surface. Most guys skimming that kind of money leave one lazy fingerprint: a vacation home, a daughter's tuition wired from the wrong account. Grant didn't. Whoever had advised him had done a real job. I started the way I always start. County recorders in LA, then San Diego, then Sacramento, then Alameda. I pulled every deed filed in a 2-year window that had a payment structure that felt off. Cash purchases over $1 million, LLCs with no operating history, transfers with nominal consideration that didn't match the property. By the end of the first week, I had a list of 42 possibles. Then I did the boring part and ran each name. The first one that pinged was a woman named Diane, who owned a house in Palo Alto worth about $3.1 million. She'd bought it in November 2019 in cash. Her tax returns for the previous 10 years showed her working as a middle school art teacher in Bakersfield. She'd never earned more than 60 grand in a year. The house was still in her name. She lived in a 2-bedroom rental off Ming Avenue. That's a red flag, but it isn't proof. People inherit money. People win settlements. I called Diane's number, said I was doing a market survey about the Palo Alto neighborhood, and got 2 minutes with her before she caught the tone and hung up. What I got in those 2 minutes was that she'd never been to Palo Alto in her life. Fine. One nominee. Grant had a friend. That's how these things start. The second one showed up in Sacramento. A man named Bernard, retired plumber, held a strip of commercial land near the airport valued at $9 million. Bought March 2020, cash, through a trust in his own name. He was 71, lived in a mobile home park in Roseville, and I sat outside his place for 2 hours watching him water tomato plants in a bathrobe. $9 million of dirt in his name, and he was clipping coupons out of the bee. Third one was in Fresno. Fourth was in San Bernardino. By the end of the second week, I had 11 possible nominees scattered across the state, each holding a piece of Grant's disappeared fortune. Nothing connected them on the surface. Different ages, different jobs. If you laid the names on a spreadsheet, you'd think it was random noise. I almost filed my interim report there. 11 names, 11 leads, hand it to the lawyers, let them start subpoenas. That's usually where my part ends. What made me stop was Bernard. Something about him nagged. Not the money, not the tomatoes. Something in the file. I pulled his background again on a Thursday night, sitting at my kitchen table with the window open, because May in Pasadena is the only month the air is worth breathing. I scrolled through his old employment history and his education record, and there it was, buried in a paragraph I'd skimmed the first time. Class of 1992, state school out near San Luis Obispo, bachelor's in business. I opened Grant's file. His resume was on page 4. Class of 1992, same school, same degree. I sat there for a minute, then I pulled Diane's background. She'd gone to that school too, in the ED department, same graduation year. The next morning, I ran all 11. Every one of them had graduated from that university in the spring of 1992. Different majors, different lives after, but they'd all been there at the same time. Some had social media that went back far enough for me to find yearbook photos. I found a class page on one of those alumni sites that hadn't been updated since 2011. Grant was in a photo from a homecoming event. In the background, laughing at something off camera, was Bernard. 20-something Bernard with a full head of hair, but the same face. I stopped filing new records for 2 days and just built the map. Put every nominee in the middle of a corkboard I keep for the messy cases. Ran their timelines against each other. Every single asset transfer, without exception, had happened between October 2019 and April 2020, a 6-month window. Some had been executed within days of each other, in different counties, by people who supposedly didn't know each other. That's not a coincidence, and it's not luck. That's someone getting on the phone with old friends. I want to be clear about something. There's no drama in this part of the job. I wasn't scared. Nobody was following me. This wasn't a movie. What I felt sitting in front of that corkboard was a very specific kind of professional quiet. The kind you get when a case that looked routine is about to get complicated for a lot of people who aren't you. I called the lead attorney on the creditor's side, a woman named Claudia, and asked for a meeting that afternoon. Drove down to her office in Century City with the map in a folder and laid it out on her conference table. Every one of them, I said. Same year, same school. He didn't hire a firm. He called his friends. Claudia stared at the board for a long time. Then she said, "How sure are you?" On the graduation dates, 100%. On the friendships, 90. On whether they knew what they were signing, honestly, I don't think a lot of them did. She asked what I meant. Bernard's got a mobile home and diabetes. Diane teaches art to 7th graders. Most of them aren't crooks. They're people who did a favor for an old friend. He probably told half of them it was a tax thing. Sign here, we'll square up later. Some of them might not even know what they own. Claudia nodded slowly. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way good lawyers do. If we file against all of them at once, on the same day, in different counties, he can't warn them. That's why I brought it in a folder and not an email. She smiled a little at that. The filings went out the second week of June. 11 suits, coordinated, in 8 counties. Freezing orders on the properties and accounts. I wasn't in the room for any of that, but I heard later that 4 of the nominees called Claudia's office within 48 hours asking what was going on, and 2 of them cried on the phone. Diane was one of the 2. She told the paralegal she hadn't heard from Grant in a year and had only signed the papers because he said he was going through a divorce and needed help. Grant himself was already gone by then. He'd left the country sometime in late May, according to the flight records the lawyers eventually pulled. Portugal first, then somewhere in the Gulf. He wasn't hiding hard, he just wasn't in California anymore. Nobody had told him yet that anything was wrong, because on his end nothing had changed. His friends still owned his stuff. His name was still on nothing. They found him in August, not through me. A different investigator picked up the trail in Lisbon and passed it to a firm that worked extradition. By then, about $31 million in assets had been frozen. Not all of it, not even close, but enough to make the creditors committee stop losing sleep. Some of it was already gone, moved through the nominees to accounts overseas before the freeze hit. The hearings started in the fall. I testified twice, once about the methodology, once about the timeline of the transfers, and how I'd matched the names to the class roster. The defense attorney tried for about an hour to make it sound like I'd cherry-picked 11 people out of a graduating class of 2,000. I'd expected that. I'd already pulled the full class list and cross-referenced every single name against California property records over the previous 3 years. Only the 11 had made large cash purchases in the window. The rest of the class was living regular lives. He didn't have a follow-up question after that. Grant's own testimony, when it eventually came, was mostly silence and objections from his lawyer. I never met him in person. I've seen his picture enough times that if he walked into a diner in Pasadena, I'd know him. But he's not going to walk into a diner in Pasadena. My invoice was paid in October, full amount, plus expenses, plus the testimony fee. Claudia sent a note along with the check that just said, "Nice map." I put it in the folder with the case file and shelved it. The thing I keep coming back to isn't Grant. It's the 11 of them. Bernard, Diane, the others whose names I know now better than the names of some of my cousins. Grant hadn't seen most of them in 30 years. He picked up the phone and said, "Remember me? Remember when we were 20? And every one of them said yes. Well guys, that's all for today's stories. Drop your thoughts below, leave a like if the episode kept you hooked, and join the channel for more. 4chan is unpredictable, and that's exactly why some of its stories feel so unsettling. You never know when a random thread is going to turn into something you remember later, in the dark. I'll see you next time.